Good morning and welcome to our FMCG Directors Network event this morning, kindly sponsored by PEWC. Before we start, Gary, you might show us a slide of who's actually attending today in terms of the brands that are in attendance, please. So the reason we're putting the brands up at the moment is everyone coming today has quite a lot of experience in negotiating and dealing with the retailers. So today is designed with that in mind. So it isn't for people at the beginning of their career, it's more for people that are a good bit through it. So just bear that in mind. You're all very welcome today, and I'm going to be introducing Brian in 1 second. We'll get very much straight into it because there's a lot of interest in this. It's our largest FMCG event we've ever had, believe it or not. And Guy, just the next slide, please, if you wouldn't mind. Just to let you know, we have found a platform called Remo that allows us to actually get together in tables of 6. So we are having an event which I'll discuss at the end on the 2nd of December. So if you register for that event, you'll be able to register and talk to 5 other people at the event. Much better than Zoom, and you can move from table to table. You don't need any input from the moderator. You can really navigate the room well, and we have used it twice so far. It's working very well. And then there's a non-FMCG event on the 26th of November that if you're a director level person, you will be invited to that over the next couple of days, and you have the opportunity to have a non-sector specific event to just meet other commercial directors who are facing some of the same challenges as yourself. Okay, thank you. So let's move on to introducing our speaker for today. So Brian Daly is the founder of Brian Daly Consulting, and Brian has 27 years experience on both sides of the fence, both as a person working for brands, Kerry Dairygold and Boyne Valley, and then he moved over about 15 years ago, and for the last number of years he's been working for BWG as a very senior buying director. So he's great experience on both sides of the fence, and I think he's a lot to offer us today. So I'm going to ask Brian a series of questions. We'll be taking questions from the audience, so if you have a question, just put it in the questions box, and my colleague Dave will be reviewing the questions and putting some onto me. So Brian, let's kick off. How are you this morning, Brian?
Very good. A bit overawed by the introduction, but anyway, we'll see how we go.
You'll be great.
And I suppose hello to to any of the guys out there that I would have dealt with over the years, and I hope to those who know me and who don't know me that over the course of today and the next half hour or so, I can give you some insight in a neutral manner. Because I suppose suppliers and retailers, it's important from a collaboration point of view. I'm not here to give away trade secrets, but I am here to kind of foster better relations and kind of good business between retailers and suppliers.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, let's kick off. Number 1, are the retailers planning for a recession?
I would say they have to be planning for a recession. I mean, notwithstanding the sales performance that they're having, and I think it's important, you know, as a supplier to realize that retailers are sales organizations as much as suppliers. You know, focus on sales and see themselves as sales organizations. And I think, you know, later on we talk about negotiations. I think it's important to bear that in mind. But yeah, they are definitely planning for a recession, although they're going to make the absolute most out of that recession because, you know, the bellwether is based on all sales from March through to now, lockdown. I mean, at the first change to level 3, there was an increase, a spike in consumer demand, and this week again with level 5, there's another spike. So yes, they will be.
So what strategies will retailers implement to drive footfall and grow share during this next recession?
Well, I think it's important that they will treat it as a recession, and you know, kind of key pillars for them will be omni-channel selling, promotions, margin management, they'll be some of the key areas. You know, the online
promotions and margin. Okay, well, okay, let's discuss let's discuss Omni first of all. Give us your thoughts on what they're going to do on the Omni front.
Well, I mean, if you look at the share reads over the last 6 months, you know, Tesco and Musgraves based SuperValu based on their online presence, and Musgraves increased locations. They have changed their share based on the use of online. It's been a huge part of what they've done. Dunn's have come to the party now, launching in recent weeks, and Lidl are working with Deliveroo. So I think that's big. I think from a wholesale point of view, all of the main wholesalers.
Retail, first of all, but is the percentage still quite small, Brian? Of the actual amount of, you know, the percentage of overall spend is not still quite small.
Well, it is still quite small. It's still in kind of low single digits, but it is a growth area. And you know, whether I think click and collect is becoming more important, you know, especially through the pandemic. And the profile of the shopper in terms of their basket spend is very attractive to the retailers.
Okay, I understand that. Okay, so you said the first one was Omni. The second one you mentioned was promotions. So what are they going to do? This is important. So what are they going to do in relation to promotions during this recession?
Well, they are still going to go for kind of tactical promotions, you know, looking at low. I know that, you know, there's EDLP pricing out there, so a kind of a medium low sort of kind of mechanic, and I suppose there's, in terms of, you know, that tactical shout. So what's going to turn the shopper's head, you know, is really that low price. And in the last recession, you know, in the company I was working for in BWG, we would have had in the Spar brand Eurocrunch, where we were targeted to get everything to around Euro price, and that was the big shout out. That was the big shout, and that was important. So from a promotion point of view, you know, a lot of suppliers use on-pack offers to deliver their investment straight through to the consumer, to the shopper themselves. On-pack offers, extra fill, banded packs, price mark packs, all really good. They drive impulse, they drive impulse purchase and rate of sale, but it's not a head turner. It doesn't create that uniqueness for the retailer. So the retailer wants to be able to engineer promotions that creates that value shout that's only available in their store.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, margin. Just give us your thoughts on margin management just for a little while, please. A good minute.
Yeah. Well, I suppose margin. You know, as I said, retailers are sales organizations, and you know, sales and margin go hand in hand. You know, and as they get pressure, you know, to drive sales and share, the traders will have a serious margin management focus as well. So, you know, there would be an awful lot of investment in price. You know, when you look at kind of, you know, the price drops that happen, or KVI pricing, you know, investment below the RRP, you know, the traders are having to manage that on a constant basis. So that margin pressure is, you know, it will increase as we go into the recession.
Okay. All right. Just your thoughts on private labels before we move on from this part.
Yeah, well, private label, you know, private label has really developed since the last recession. You know, when in the last recession, private label was a price fighter. You know, it's now kind of in from entry level up to super premium. You know, your A brands, your secondary and tertiary brands, you know, all have a competitor there, you know, at different private label levels. So I think private label, you know, is going to be something that's going to be really leveraged in going into the recession. You know, it's obviously a longer term play, and I think it's important for suppliers to understand their relationship in their category with private label. So how do they perform for the retailer against the private label? What does their margin profile look like? You know, so, and there's some very good examples in terms of private label that just kind of, you know, probably give you a good example in terms of how the traders think.
Can you give me some examples, please?
Yeah, sure. I suppose in terms of, if you look at the likes of, say, health and beauty, or some of the household categories like Ignition. Sorry, one sec. So household is still very much a brand, or sorry, health and beauty is still very much a branded area. You know, there's a proliferation of SKUs, and you know, retailers look at, you know, products as functions within categories. So there's a breadth of function within health and beauty, heavily branded. So there's very low penetration of private label in health and beauty. Whereas if you look at household and take Ignition as an example, very simple category. You know, the product either lights a fire or it doesn't. So there's very high penetration of private label in this category. And you know, when you look at it, you have to also look at the margin that's available to the retailer in these categories. You know, so you know, if you were trying to map the price differential in private label versus the A brand, it's very hard to do it across all the categories because there's no set figure. It used to be kind of more than 30% discount, or you know, cheaper than the A brand on promotion. That was kind of the benchmark. But with dynamic pricing of private label now, it's all about, you know, immediate benefits or longer term plays. So you know, if you look at baby, and baby is a very good example in terms of, you know, the penetration of private label, and you could also look at pet food as well. But baby, I suppose nowhere is the relationship between the branded product more trusted by the shopper, i.e. mum and dad. And if you look at baby accessories, you know, for years as a retailer, it was very expensive to sell baby accessories. It was always being sold on promotion. It was, you know, a real bellwether product, and trying to get mum's attention because mum is a big shopper. But there was no money in it. It was costing money to engage there. So a low margin private label product is far better than a negative margin branded product. Gotcha. So if you look at the space that's being given by the retailers to private label wipes, nappies, accessories, you know, it's taken up about 40-45% of the shelf space. You know, and that's a big change in the last number of years. And some of that was motivated by the brand in Aldi and Lidl. You know, and you see, you know, actual branded house brands rather than private label.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. Like, so this year, like the retailers and the suppliers, they've been working very collaboratively over the last 7 months, making sure the supply chain to deliver the products in the retail outlets. So what's your advice on maintaining the spirit of collaboration as we enter into negotiation now for next year?
Yeah, well, I think this is a very, very unique year. You know, I think, you know, on the rising tide, I think pretty much every boat has lifted in their performance. So there is momentum there. I think it's really important to maintain that momentum. And, you know, it's a time now to stand shoulder to shoulder, you know, when it comes to negotiations and engagement with retailers. It's time to continue to stand shoulder to shoulder rather than changing position and kind of standing eye to eye with your counterpart. And you know, I think it's a really good time to call out the wins. You know, supply chain consolidation over the last number of years has kind of been very favorable and maybe tipped the balance in the retailer's favor, you know, in terms of control of the supply chain. But I think it's been a really quick learning for them in terms of how exposed they can be, you know, when the pressure came on and suppliers really stood up to ensure that the supply chain into their warehouses and onto their shelves was maintained. And I think, you know, I think they are very appreciative. I think Joe Manning from Tesco called it out there a couple of weeks ago as well. So, you know,
what are your top? Do you give us your top three? Your top three things you would do to maintain the collaborative spirit that has been great over the last 7 months?
Well, I don't know. I'd put it down to 3 or 2 or 1 or 5, but I think one of the key things is to engage with the retailer. You know, there's momentum now in the relationship. Things are going really well. I know that the margin mix for some suppliers might not be great, but the sales line is good, and as long as the sales line is good, you can play with the margin. So I would definitely look to engage. I would look to listen to what your retailers have to say to you. You know, what are their needs? They will have concerns. You know, this growth is potentially built on sand. You know, it may not last, you know, into the second half of next year. You know, they are going to have pressures, and, you know, their mix, you know, if you look at convenience, their mix is not going to be great at the moment. You know, a lot of tobacco being sold, take-home grocery. You know, the higher margin impulse and deli areas are probably down in sales, and it's not probably, they are down in sales, and they're not going to get better in the next number of weeks. So they have concerns. Listen to what their concerns is, and understand how I suppose any of your plans can work with the retailer. You know, because, you know, in normal times, a lot of suppliers will come into the retailer with their plans and then try and shoehorn a result, you know, against what the actual retailer wants. And, you know, the really collaborative guys take a slightly different approach. They'll come in and they'll talk and they'll listen, and they'll bring something that's bespoke to the retailer, whether it's a multiple or a convenience operator. And I think one of the things I would say not to do is kind of try and lift and shift plans between formats. So between multiples, discounters, convenience, and wholesale. You know, you really need to have a bespoke plan for each of those customers. You know, and depending on what area you're working in, you know, each of those customers will have a very different margin profile for you. And, you know, and again, from the retailer's point of view, you will have a very different margin profile to other suppliers. And you may even have a very different margin profile within the category that you operate in, you know, depending on whether you're the number 1 player, the number 2 player, the number 3 player. And the trader will understand exactly what your margin profile is and what you're bringing. So I would say to kind of critically analyze exactly what you mean to the retailer. So in terms of looking at a contribution to margin, you'll probably understand your own contribution to margin. Potentially you bench your main competitors, but bench what you mean in terms of private label as well, because I think one of the key things in going into a negotiation, and, you know, I know from the supplier side, you know, that, you know, it was always a daunting experience going in to meet with retailers. And then when I moved over to the retail side, I kind of understood it. But I learned an awful lot about how retailers view the supplier relationship. And, you know, over the years, I kind of got to a stage where, you know, in terms of engaging with suppliers, well, you know, there were some really challenging people out there in the supply community, and I don't mean really challenging in terms of difficult personalities, although there probably were a few. It was more around, you know, some really professional guys, really clued in, you know, who really knew their stuff. But I think from my point of view, data was a huge part of how I operated. And, you know, the old managing director, Willie O'Byrne in BWG, or I think he's actually is the old managing director, because I think he left earlier this month, kind of preamble to retirement. But anyway, Willie was always data driven, and he really instilled the power of data. And I took that on, you know, being a little bit of an Excel nerd. I took that data piece on, and I use data a lot. And I think when you go in to negotiate with supplier or with the retailers, you know, these guys are really sharp as well. They know their stuff, and they will already have the data. They will know what you can bring to the table and what your competitors bring to the table, and they will probably have already worked out the answer that potentially they don't need a result from the negotiation. You know, I've been in situations where I actually have met with a supplier, and, you know, after giving a presentation on what we were doing, I just basically said thank you. Didn't ask for anything, because I actually didn't need to take anything more from that supplier. At that stage, I needed to change the mix between the suppliers, because by changing that mix, it was actually worked better for the business. So I think that's something to bear in mind. You really want to be.
Just finish. I thought you were finished. Just tell us your point. Finish your point.
No, I think it's really important to be engaged with your customer, because there's a number of reasons as to why you might not be engaged, and not of your own volition. It may be the volition of your customer. And I would ask the question, why?
Okay, ask the question, Mike. Okay, I'm going to go back to something you said earlier on. You said listen. All right, so I'm going to ask you. Well, give us what are the best questions to ask the retailer? Then, if you're going to ask them 3 or 4 questions, what are the best questions to ask?
I would say what's the best type of question, and it's very much to ask an open question. If the person you're negotiating with or the retailer has an opportunity to give you a yes/no answer, they will.
Okay, let's assume we know about open questions, right? Can you
Yeah.
give us examples of really brilliant open questions to ask the retailer, please?
Well, I suppose it's more about understanding what their plans are. Ask them what their plans
Okay.
are. You know, if they have an ask that you're not comfortable with, you know, ask about their ask. Try to understand about their ask, because as long as you're listening, you're learning, as long as they're explaining, you have an opportunity to understand where you have opportunities to maybe you know, undermine the ask that's being put out. I mean, retailers will come up with asks that are probably incredulous, you know, at times, and you know, the outrageous opener, and how do you break down the outrageous opener? And it really is about asking the right questions, and they're the types of questions. Ask about the ask. Try to understand that. Establish, is the ask built on fact? Is it built on data? Is it built on aspiration or ambition?
Okay, that was useful. That particular question. Just say that one more time. Just, is the ask based on data? Is it based on ambition? Is it based on
aspiration? Data, ambition, aspiration, or ambition. Or sorry, gotcha. I said ambition. Right. Yeah, but it's along those lines. Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you. So you know, margin management. You know, there are other words I could use. Promotions. You know, omni. I get it, and yeah. Private label, right? So, but 3 of those 4, it's not filling me full of joy if I'm the brand owner. Okay. So my question for you is, now during this recession, so it's not generally, it's over the next 12 months, when I've been squeezed for margin, I'm asked to give more ambitious promotions, you know, I'm being threatened more with private label, and people are getting much better with it. So what strategies can suppliers use to protect their brands over the next 15 months?
Well, I suppose just to go back to that point, that you know, this is not all doom and gloom. You know, when I'm talking about this, I think it's important to look at the opportunities, because you know, I'm outlining the reality of this. You know, the guys in the audience know their brands, and they have all the modeling. I mean, one of the reasons that I kind of set up my own business was because I saw the difference between, you know, the bigger suppliers and how they use data versus the smaller suppliers. So I'm just giving out pointers. The guys in the audience know what they need to do in terms of margin. I mean, private label, you know, while it is a threat, you know, it's a measured threat within any category, and the guys know. I mean, you only have to look at what the soft drinks guys have done, you know, in terms of, you know, take-home product. It is, you know, there was a big effort to bring in private label product, cheap and cheerful. And a big price differential, but the guys have done a really good job in terms of keeping that brand call on shelf, you know. So you know, these are realities, but they're also opportunities in terms of you know, how suppliers manage this going forward.
Okay, so let's move into negotiation strategies with retailers. So maybe share some of your insights into negotiation with retailers from your last 15 years experience. Try at the same time a light on what's more relevant now for the next 15 months. If you were negotiating with a retailer, give us some insight into your strategies.
Into my strategies as a retailer, or if I was a supplier coming in to meet me?
If you were a supplier, advise the suppliers. Everyone here today is a supplier, so advise us.
Yeah, well, I would definitely take a collaborative approach, and I would kind of, I suppose, in preparation for any negotiation, one of the big considerations by a trader is what they've experienced in the previous 12 months. So as you look into the next 12 to 18 months, you know, you need to look at what the trader is experiencing in the relationship with you as, you know, a national account manager or commercial director, because a lot of the negotiations, it's not like, it's not, you know, a negotiation on buying a TV. This is a negotiation that probably has a detailed agreement around it. And how that agreement is executed is kind of, you know, the benchmark for what the trader believes they're going to experience, you know, in the negotiation and after the negotiation. You know, so being true to your word, being responsive, being engaging, you know, and remember that the trader has more suppliers to deal with than most national accounts managers have customers to deal with. So they have to be more agile in terms of their engagement. They want people who can fix problems for them, who can prevent problems happening in the first place, and who can help the engagement be as breed in, breed out, as easy as that as possible. You know, so that's very important in terms of, you know, how you're viewed by the retailer and the trader. So I would make sure that, you know, the engagement is collaborative. You know, there's, you know, and I would make sure that you know, anybody who's going in to meet the retailer has the same level of autonomy as the trading manager that they're meeting, because the trading manager will look at somebody coming in with low autonomy as, you know, a kind of poor use of their time, because they probably won't get to a negotiated agreement because the person probably doesn't have the scope to do that, and it'll probably end up in an escalation anyway. But in terms of getting involved in kind of negotiations and engagement, you know, the negotiation is a very small part of our year. You know, it's probably 3 or 4 meetings out of, you know, a dozen or 2 dozen meetings over the course of the year. So I would very much focus and make sure that all the people who should be aligned, because if you can get the retailer to view you as a partner and genuinely view you as a partner, it does make a difference to the relationship. You know, everything used to be funneled through the sales guys. Make sure your touch points are between finance guys, finance to finance, supply chain, and your marketing people and your sales people and operations.
Okay, that's from a relationship management perspective. Anything else specifically from a negotiation perspective?
Well, I suppose, can you be more specific? Is there a particular area that you'd?
Preparation. So in terms of, do you have any tips on a better type of prep that will get a better result?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think, you know, data is hugely important. You know your numbers. You know, I have met a number of suppliers over the years who were really impressive in terms of knowing their numbers and knowing the market, and their knowledge of their own categories and the preparation that they've put in on its own is, you know, very difficult to deal with as a retailer. You know, they're able to kind of close off avenues, you know, as you're engaging, and with their knowledge and the preparation that they've put in, you know, they're able to control the engagement. So I would say, you know, prepare, know your numbers, know your categories, understand your competitors, and understand the value that you currently bring to the retailer.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm going to pull Dave Malone in. He has a couple of questions. There's a lot of questions today, so you're certainly creating a lot of interest from our members. So that's good news. Dave, can I ask you to magically appear?
Brian, good morning, Brian. So
morning, David.
The first one is a question, a stroke statement you've been asked to give your perspective on. So store location and its proximity to the consumer is becoming a far bigger driver of footfall than promotional mechanics. And often then promotion spend is seen as a margin, a deflator for all concerned. What are your views and comments on that?
On proximity, first of all, yeah, proximity, because of the pandemic, you know, people aren't shopping around. There's limits. You know, if you're living where I live in Kinnegad, I have a choice of 3 stores in the town. I can't go to Mullingar, I can't go to Trim, I can't go to any of those places because they're outside of the 5 kilometer zone. So proximity is huge from that point of view. Nor do I have the opportunity to click and collect, but I can shop online. So proximity is, you know, is hugely important. I will go to the local store, and you know, I have no need to travel any further than that. The second part of the question was around promotions and it creating devaluing. Is that right, David?
Yes. So so promotion spend under this circumstance or that we find ourselves in is a margin deflator for all concerned.
Yeah, look, I mean, promotions generally, I know there's a belief that retailers, you know, scrape up a lot of the investment from suppliers in terms of their promotional investment, and it doesn't all reach the consumer. And yes, it is margin deflative, and you know, it kind of sounds like a question from an accountant rather than a salesperson, because you know, we have to invest in order to drive footfall in stores and to promote impulse purchase. And you know, that's a fact of life within the business, and it's something that we all have to manage. Suppliers are managing promotional investment on their own margins, and the retailers are doing the same. So it's a necessary evil, if that's how the author of the question sees it, but it is a hugely important part of the retail industry. And just in terms of promotions, there's going to be a big change in the next year in terms of promotions. So the tactical spend, you know, by retailers in terms of getting share, a lot of that goes around alcohol, and there's changes to minimum unit pricing is going to be introduced at the end of next year. And you know, one of the big investments that retailers make is in alcohol. And you know, from I think the middle of January anyway, the Public Health Act is going to change that, you know, vendors cannot kind of promote alcohol on a tactical basis or attach the sale of alcohol to bonus and club card points. But that's going to be a big change for retailers. So as I said, retailers invest a lot in this area, and they're going to be looking at other expandable categories that can fill that void over the next year. So, you know, if you're not in alcohol at the moment, and it's really positive for alcohol, and if you're a big brand in alcohol, it's really important and it's really positive. Also for convenience retailers, it's positive because of the minimum unit pricing. But as a supplier, and if you look at promotions as being a bad thing, then okay, it's not great news. But if you look at promotions being a good thing, then it is a great opportunity to drive your sales, as long as you can manage your margin and your investment with that.
Gotcha. Dave, do you have any other questions there? I know Dave is lurking in the background. Any other questions there, Dave? I think there's a couple.
Okay, so if an agreement between, and I better caveat again in case any people have joined us late, Brian is now independent. So
yeah, I am very independent, yes.
Yeah, you're not here at the representing a supplier or sorry, a retailer at the moment. So just so people understand that. So if an agreement between a retailer and a supplier has failed, you know, and let's say it's the perception of the supplier that it's the retailer has failed to live up to their side of the agreement. From your experience, when you were a supplier, how would you manage that to try and win credibility back? So that's the question I've been asked.
Well, sorry, is it a credibility question or a kind of execution of the agreement?
Well, I think, yeah, I think it's credibility stroke trust stroke execution.
Okay, well, look, it's a relationship piece. Yeah, it's a relationship piece. And look, you know, the one thing I've learned over the years is that, you know, the industry doesn't hold grudges. You know, we negotiate all the time. You know, we fall in and out of love on a constant basis. And, you know, the mood changes. You know, I wouldn't worry about something like that. I would just get on with the relationship, you know, and look at what the opportunities are. I mean, I used to say after every meeting, after a tough meeting, it's never personal, it's always business. And you know, you have to kind of get back and reevaluate your relationship and you know, take cognizance of what your brand brings to the relationship, or your brands, or your, you know. So I wouldn't dwell on it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any other questions, Dave?
So there's a question here just about the challenge between price and quality at the moment. So how is data being filtered to retailers without feet on the street at the moment? Does that make sense to you, Brian?
How is data being filtered to retailers?
Yeah,
Market
so
data?
in other words, the question is, so from an education perspective, you know, so if the supplier says it's not all about price, for the consumer is more about quality, how do you filter data to the retailer without having feet on the street?
Well, you know, the EPOS systems are available now, and the detailed categorization of products. You know, you can take qualitative data feedback from consumers in terms of what their opinion is about you know, products and the product offering. But the quantitative data that's available through the systems, through EPOS systems, gives you very clear indications of what people are doing, and so what the shopper is doing, and you know, what the trends are. You know, that, you know, the guys, like, you know, from a Tesco, dunnhumby point of view, you know, these guys, you know, really understand the analytics behind it. You know, and those guys operate with all of the retailers and the wholesale operators, you know, in terms of understanding what's happening. And remember, the margin profile for a retailer versus supplier is quite different. And I know some of you out there are kind of going, oh no, here he goes again. But it is quite different. And as a retailer, you have to really put a lot of effort into the data, because you have to sweat that margin, because, you know, it is a different profile.
Okay.
Okay,
Thanks,
great.
Dave. If you have any more questions, in due course, I'll pull you in, Dave. I want to just
Okay,
move on
thanks,
to Brexit.
Colin.
Cheers, Dave. I want to move on to Brexit for a moment. Brian, as you know an awful lot of the retailers, what are the key concerns for retailers as we head towards a potential no-deal Brexit?
Well, I suppose the biggest concern is supply chain. You know, and I think the retailers, you know, will have seen over the last 6 months the importance of the inbound supply chain and the work that suppliers do in terms of supporting them on that. But the supply chain, and particularly around fresh produce, because any date lost on fresh produce, it will probably end up at the retailer's cost. There could be some negotiations, you know, in terms of, you know, support and whatever else, but that would be a big concern about dates on product. The ambient and alcohol, you know, it's far more robust, it's more resilient. You know, warehouse capacity, you know, most of the warehouses have 3 to 4 weeks of stock, and due diligence would have been done previously in terms of, you know, which products are coming from the UK and which products are, you know, from the Irish market or long lined in from Europe. So there would be they'd have a very good handle on it, but supply chain is the main concern around Brexit. Okay.
And my final question, what are the learnings that we can take from the last recession, and that we're going to, like it just seems like only yesterday there was a huge recession, but there's actually been 4 or 5 years really. But we're facing it again.
Yeah.
So what would you say the learnings we could take from the last recession?
Well, I suppose, you know, first of all, the reasons previously was, you know, the banks and property prices collapsing and people in negative equity. Obviously, this recession is now down to the pandemic. I think we've more control as a society and government in terms of the depth and duration of this recession. We didn't have that control previously. And I think we have to look at it from the point of view that there's a lot more money on deposit. Now that kind of, you know, creates 2 different levels within society. You know, those whose businesses are are doing well, and people are employed and they have that disposable income, and those who are really struggling in terms of mortgages. Because remember, what we've seen over the last 6 months, mortgage holidays are starting to come to an end. The PUP scheme is starting to come to an end. All that money that was in the economy is going to ebb out of the economy and go back into the banks to pay for mortgages. So that is going to change. I think what's happening in the market at the moment. Retailers and suppliers alike, I think they recognize that. And as I said earlier on, in terms of planning for recessions, well, there will be indulgence purchases by the people who are still in employment and who are spending very little. They're staying at home. They're not getting to spend on holidays. They're maybe doing some home improvements, but they will want to treat themselves. There will be that, and there's a big place for brands in that. But I think retailers in their strategy will plan for the norm, and that is around the kind of value call.
Okay, but are there learnings we can take from the last recession, though, specifically, do you think?
From a retailer point of view, in terms of what they're doing and their strategies. Yeah, well, look, I mentioned private label earlier on. Private label is far more developed, and I would have worked in Spar International, in developing private label, and I would have worked with operators in different countries. And Spar in other countries is a multiple operator, and looking at how those guys on a bigger scale manage private label and how they looked at private label was completely different. They looked at the opportunities to, I suppose, drive private label share where they possibly could. And I think it's, and I think private label is going to be a big part of their recessionary plan in terms of learning. It previously was a price fighter. Now it's a more prevalent brand. And if you look at the rationalization of range that happened in the last recession, it was very much used as a blunt instrument. I think the learnings that retailers got from that, particularly, if I was to call out Tesco in terms of, they did a massive reshaping of their range.
That's right.
It didn't work as they would have planned, but I think they would have taken learnings from that. And I think kind of managing that range on shelf to allow them to be as competitive as they possibly can and protect their margin. I think that will be a change between the last recession and now.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. Gary, I'm going to ask you to, so don't go anywhere yet, Brian, but I'm just going to wrap it up, and then I'll thank you the normal way. Gary, can you please bring on the next slide of the next couple of events, please? Okay, so we have two FMCG events, very kindly sponsored by PwC. There's one on waste on November the 19th. You might want to bring your supply chain directors to that. Waste and packaging beyond the short-term fixes. It's decent, it's sophisticated, and the content is very specific. All right, and then on the December the 2nd, we have a fantastic event. Probably, it already has about 100 people booked into it. So we have Mike Coop, who all of you know from Sainsbury's. He's going to speak to us about what he sees in 2021. So his title, A Year of Continued Change and Turbulence. So take from that what you will. And that event will be changed into a networking event where you can actually network with people before on Remo. He speaks afterwards, after the networking, and then you can network afterwards. So it'll still be about 45 minutes for networking before and networking after. So thank you very much, Gary. So now we're moving into wrap up. Brian, listen, thank you so much for today. You gave us a lot of very, very valuable information and good tips, and I know how much you prepared. I'll ask the members how they're getting on with all your tips in due course, and maybe at some point again you might come back in a year's time and comment on what unfolded over the previous 12 months.
Absolutely, and appreciate the time, and good luck to everyone in the coming months and Christmas trade.
Thanks very much, Brian, and good luck to all of you, and I'll see you over the next couple of weeks at the different events. Thank you so much.
Cheers.